Good evening and welcome to our McClendon Scholar event with Katharine Hayhoe. We are so delighted that you are here this evening and welcome you into our midst. I am Heather Shortledge, the transitional pastor here at the New York Avenue Presbyterian Church, and it's a delight to be with you this evening. I offer a prayer of blessing as we begin our time together. Please pray with me. On this day, the blessings of heaven. On this day, the blessings of earth. On this day, the blessings of sea and of sky. To open us to life, to ground us in life, to fill us with life and with wonder. On those we love this day and on every human family, the blessings of heaven, the blessings of earth, the blessings of sea and of sky. That prayer comes from John Philip Newell and his book, Praying with the Earth. Welcome. We're so glad you're here tonight.
Good evening. I'm Theo Brown, director of the McClendon Scholar Program. I want to add my word of welcome and thank you for joining us tonight. The McClendon Scholar Program was started 15 years ago at the New York Avenue Presbyterian Church as a way to educate and involve our congregation and the broader Washington, D.C. community in the important moral issues of the day. We do that by bringing in prominent scholars who are also people of faith and inviting them to share their wisdom and insight with us. We've had a wide range of leading thinkers join us through the years, and I invite you to go to our church website, nyapc.org, and learn more about the programs we've conducted, and also if you're interested to see recordings of programs with former McClendon scholars such as Walter Brueggemann, E.J. Dion, Brian Stevenson, Raphael Warnock, Karina Gore, James Lawson, Susanna Heschel, and many more. I'll share the website information again at the end of the evening, along with some short announcements about future programs. So tonight we're looking at what is clearly one of the most important issues facing humanity, an issue that poses what may be the greatest challenge we have ever faced. And wherever you are, I want to thank you for taking time to tune in and learn about this vitally important subject. Now, as we've learned through the past year and a half, one advantage to online programs is that people can literally tune in from anywhere. And as a result, our McClendon Scholar programs now have participants far beyond the Washington, D.C. area. People join us from many different states and occasionally from other countries. It's always interesting to see who is joining, and I want to take just a minute as we sort of also practice using the chat, if you will, at the end. You see the chat function at the bottom if you're not too familiar with webinars there, and you click on chat and it will open up and you can make comments. And I want to invite you to type in your name, if you will, and where you're viewing from. We want to hear from anyone who wants to let us know, but particularly if you're outside the Washington, D.C. area, tell us your name, and maybe if you're with a particular congregation or organization, put that in too. And I see people coming in from North Dakota and Wilmington, Delaware, and my friend Nancy Goodman in Boston, and people all throughout the D.C. area, Prescott, Arizona. You can see the names. So we really are a nationwide audience here tonight of folks. And just delighted to have you here in this sort of electronic town meeting that we're able to do through webinars in this way. I want to briefly explain the format for the program and then introduce our McClendon Scholar for the evening, Dr. Katharine Hayhoe. This is going to be a very interactive evening where you will have the opportunity to ask some questions of Dr. Hayhoe, but also to answer some. She's going to explain how we're going to do that when she comes on, and she's going to invite you to download an app Oh, I know that sounds intimidating to a lot of people, but it's really easy. That will allow you to comment directly to her, respond to some questions, and send her questions that we will discuss later on. So for that reason, we won't be using the Q&A function that usually you see at the bottom of the webinar screen, but we will be taking questions through this app that she will be explaining to you in a few minutes. Again, glad to have you from all of these wonderful places, more from Massachusetts and Michigan, Tacoma, Washington. Just wonderful to have you here, all of us united in our concern about and interest in this issue. After Dr. Hayhoe speaks, we'll have two individuals start the questioning. Joelle Novi of Interfaith Power and Light, which is a group cooperating with us in sponsoring this program tonight, and Linda Kelly, a high school student who's a member of our church, will begin our time of questions and discussion after Dr. Hayhoe's presentation. Then after a few questions from them, we'll take and point out some of the questions you have asked, and the rest of the time will be spent in discussion of those questions. It is now my privilege to introduce Dr. Katharine Hayhoe to you. Katharine Hayhoe is an accomplished atmospheric scientist who studies climate change and why it matters to us here and now. She's also, as you will soon see, an excellent communicator and has received a number of awards in that regard. The American Geophysical Union gave her the Climate Communication Prize. The Stephen Schneider Climate Communication Award has been given to her, and also she's a recipient of the United Nations Champion of the Earth Award. She has also been named to some impressive lists, including Time Magazine's 100 Most Influential People, Foreign Policy's 100 Leading Thinkers, and Fortune Magazine's World Greatest Leaders. Her TED Talk, which some of you may have seen, entitled "The Most Important Thing You Can Do to Fight Climate Change, Talk About It," has been viewed by almost 4 million times. And her new book, Saving Us, A Climate Scientist's Case for Hope and Healing in a Divided World, has just been published last month by Simon & Schuster. I have read this book, and it is filled with important information presented in a very easy to understand format. Those of you who are intimidated by science and worry about understanding things, this book does a great job of explaining the various aspects of the challenge of climate change and even more importantly, talking about what we can do about it and why there are cases for hope in spite of the difficulty. So I strongly recommend this book to you. Katharine Hayhoe also serves as chief scientist for the Nature Conservancy, and she's also a Paul Horn Distinguished Professor and the Political Science Endowed Professor in Public Policy and Public Law at Texas Tech University in Lubbock, Texas. She is by birth a Canadian, and she has a Bachelor of Science in Physics from the University of Toronto and an MS and a PhD in Atmospheric Science from the University of Illinois. She's also been awarded honorary doctorates from Colgate University and Victoria University at the University of Toronto. I am pleased to welcome Dr. Katharine Hayhoe, and we are delighted to have her with us this evening as a McClendon scholar.
Thank you so much for that kind welcome, and greetings to everyone. I've been looking at all the names and all the places as you've been putting them in the chat. I recognize many of your names. I recognize all your places. Of course, we have many people from the DC area, which makes sense, but we also have people from across the country. I've seen north, south, east, and west. Quite a few people from Canada. I'm happy to see that. Nobody from Toronto, where I'm from, but I saw a few West Coasters out there. I even saw someone from Galway, Ireland. And in fact, Ireland was the last place I was before the pandemic. So special greetings to you. All right. I am going to, somebody says they're here from the Burger King. That's interesting. I wonder if you're listening with headphones or not. I've never had that before. So we're going to be talking to each other tonight. I'm going to ask you a few questions, And then I'm going to talk about climate change. And while I'm talking about my book and climate change, you can put in your questions. And here's the fun part. You can upvote the questions you most want Joelle and I to discuss afterwards, because we have a lot of people on this webinar, 367. So I imagine you'll have a lot of questions, but as we go along, you're going to be able to not only enter your questions, but upvote the ones that you most want us to get to at the end, because we will not have time to take all the questions. So how on earth do you do this? I will show you if somebody gives me the ability to share my screen. I do need that. I will show you, and I will say that some people have already caught on to this. What you have to do is you have to go to the link that I'm putting in the chat right now, which is polev.com/my name, which is Katharine. There's the link again. Okay, and I will share my screen with you. Here we go. Go to polev.com/Katharine. You can also go to polev.com and then enter Katharine, but you have to spell it right with 2 A's. And if it asks you to enter your name, just click skip. Anonymous is fine. And you are going to get the first very low stakes but important question, which is, I am a what type of person? I am a coffee person, I am a tea person, or I am caffeine free. Now, it's no surprise that the coffee people are off to a very early start here. You have a lot higher caffeine content than anyone else. But we see that tea is holding steady about 30%. Oh, tea's dropping. Oh, dear. And caffeine free is rising. Good for you. I respect that. I am occasionally caffeine free, but I have to say that most mornings I start with tea. And in fact, in my kitchen, I have an entire cupboard of tea. And when I say tea, I do not mean fruity tea. I do not mean caffeine-free tea. I mean black tea. All kinds of black teas, but it has to be black. All right. So now you know how this works. I'm going to ask you a more difficult question. The next question I'm going to ask you, you have to answer with one word. Just one word. Not two, one. The next question I'm going to ask you is this. When it comes to climate change, I feel what? Give me a word that describes how you feel when it comes to climate change. And as you can see, this is a wordle. So the more people who say a word, the bigger the word gets. So look at these words. And I will tell you, you are not alone. I have asked a number of people this question, and this is exactly what I see every time. Overwhelmed, scared, anxious, worried, helpless, frustrated, grieved, depressed, terrified, despairing, challenged, conflicted, annoyed, yes, puzzled and concerned, powerless, panicky, and a few optimistics, as well as pessimistic too. You are not alone. In fact, let me tell you this. Over the last 5 years, no matter who I have spoken to, I could be speaking to a group of climatologists at a scientific meeting. I could be speaking to a group of church folks. I could be speaking to business people or community organizations. No matter who I've been speaking to over the last 5 years, the number one question that I have gotten every single time is what gives you hope? And so that is why I wrote the book. So for every person here who said anxious, scared, overwhelmed, worried, frustrated, concerned, or worse, you are in the right place. You are in exactly the right place. And this is exactly the right talk and event for you. Come if you are anxious. Come if you are scared. Come if you could barely even bring yourself to click on the link to join us. This is the perfect place, and we are going to talk about exactly how you feel and exactly what we can do about it. Before we do that, though, I want to ask you one more question, and then I'm going to open it up so you can start asking me questions as we go along. And the one more question I want to ask you is because I'm so curious. It's because this is an event that's being hosted by a Presbyterian church, but as you can see, it's open to anyone, and so many people have joined from all across the spectrum. So if you don't mind, I would love it if you would give me one more word. Now you know how this works. Give me one more word. How would you describe yourself faith-wise? Would you give yourself a label in terms of I am Presbyterian, or I am Catholic, or I'm Baptist, or I am Jewish, or I am Hindu? Would you say I'm a humanist or an atheist? Would you say I'm searching or seeking? What would you say that you are? And I'm just asking this again because we have so many people on this call. All right. It looks like the Presbyterians have a slight edge, which is not surprising since this is hosted by a Presbyterian church. But we have a huge variety here. This is huge. This is the landscape of the world right here. We have all kinds of Christians. We have people who simply categorize themselves as spiritual or multi-faith. We have people who are ecumenical, Franciscan, Swedenborgian, pagan, mystical, unengaged, seeking, faithful, conflicted, Quaker, Catholic Buddhist, Methodist, Unitarian, and Universalist. I assume those two go together. All right. Well, whoever you are, from one end of the entire spectrum to the other, although I don't really think this is a spectrum, it's sort of more like a big circle, you are in the right place too. Because what I have to say applies to you. It applies to every single person here, no matter what you said you feel and no matter who you said you are. So as we go along, now you know how this works. You can type in any question you want at any time while I'm talking. And you can look at the questions other people are asking, and you can upvote the ones that you most want Joelle and I to get to the end. You can do this at any time until we start taking Q&A. I'm going to leave this open the whole time. But now I'm going to start to talk. So remember, anytime you can put questions in here. So I've just written a book called Saving Us. Why is it called Saving Us? So often when we talk about climate change, and I've started to keep count. So far, since I started keeping count a few weeks ago, I have heard someone say this every single day, at least once, a different person. Whenever we talk about climate change, we always refer to it as saving the planet. That's what we talk about. We talk about saving the planet. Well, as someone who has both a degree in astrophysics and climate science, I am here to tell you something. The planet will be here long after we are gone. The planet will survive anything we do to it. It is not about saving the planet, as if the planet is somehow separate from us. The planet does not need us. We need the planet. It is about saving us, where, just to be clear, by us, I mean humans, human civilization, and many of the other living things who share this planet with us. It is about saving us. Every living thing, which, for those of us of the Judeo-Christian tradition, in Genesis chapter 1, it says, and we believe, that God gave humans responsibility over every living thing on this planet. And those living things include plants, they include animals, and they absolutely include our sisters and our brothers as well. So that's why I called the book Saving Us, because that is what is at stake. It is not somehow a competition between our lives and the planet. As one student recently asked me, he said, but aren't we worried that we might spend too much money fixing climate change? And he asked this very sincerely. Aren't we worried we might spend too much money fixing climate change, that it might end up putting the economy at risk because we spent too much to fix climate change? And I said, no, you're looking at it completely the wrong way around. If we don't fix climate change, there will be no economy. The economy will be one of the first things to go, along with political stability. There will be no economy. And when you think about it that way, then the question is not how much is too much to spend. It's the question is, what can we afford not to spend, right? If the house is burning down, you don't sit there picking the few shirts and pants and sweaters out of your closet you're willing to donate to charity. If the house is burning down, you grab your photo albums. Yeah, if you still have them, I still do. I have a plan of what to grab. If the house is burning down, you grab what is most precious to you, your children, your pets, maybe some photo albums, and you run out the door. You save everything that you can. That's what this is about. It's about saving us, saving other living things, and saving what matters. And when we have that perspective, the world looks completely different. Climate action looks completely different. And our perspective shifts to really see this as it is. Why is it about saving us? Well, what does climate change affect? It affects the water that we drink, the water quality and the water quantity. Whether we have water, whether we don't, whether we have too much, whether it's even safe. Climate change literally affects the air that we breathe, the wildfire smoke in California, the air pollution that worsens the warmer it gets. Climate change literally affects the food that we eat. We have been experiencing $5 billion worth of crop losses on average every year since the 1980s, most of it in low-income countries where people cannot afford to buy their own food if their crops are gone, and that's because of climate change. Not only that, but as carbon dioxide levels increase, plants are growing faster with the same amount of nutrients. So we're getting less nutritional value to our vegetables and fruits in a higher CO2 world. And that might not matter to us here, where nutritional content can be easily supplemented by vitamins, but it matters a lot, again, to those in the poorest areas, both here and on the other side of the world, who depend on that food for their basic nutrition. What else does climate change affect? It affects the buildings and the roads and the water and energy and electricity systems that we use. Did you know that every piece of infrastructure we have on our planet, tens of trillions of dollars worth of it, all of the water pipes, the power lines, the roads and bridges and sewer systems and culverts, the houses and buildings and schools and churches, did you know that all the infrastructure we have on our planet was built for a climate that no longer exists? Our building codes are based on the past, not the future. Today, our homes sit in a different world than the one that they were constructed to cope with. And so we are seeing significant failures in our infrastructure already, as they are overwhelmed by flood and drought and heat and more. That's why, as I often say, and you may have heard me say this before, but it is so important to emphasize this, to care about climate change, we only have to be one thing. And that one thing is not an environmentalist. That one thing is not somebody who votes a certain way. That one thing is a human being living on this planet. And you know what? We are all that. So that's why the book is called Saving Us. But I wrote it to answer the two most common questions that I've gotten from almost anyone I've spoken to over the last 5 years. And if you've been to one of my talks over the last 5 years, you were probably somewhere where somebody asked these two questions. What is the first question? The first question is, what gives you hope? And when I first got this question, I had to stop and think, because I hadn't really sort of processed consciously for myself. I knew there were things that gave me hope, but I had to put those together. And to do so, I started, first of all, with what does not give us hope, what we often look to give us hope, but which fails us again and again, leaving us even more depressed and discouraged than we were in the beginning. What does not give us hope? Well, first of all, the science. And second of all, the politics. How many of you said frustrated, angry, or concerned in that question I asked you earlier because of the political situation the United States finds itself in right now? We put our faith in, or hope, I should say, we put our hope in a particular politician or a particular bill or a particular policy. We put our hope in, oh, the scientists will know what to do, or the scientists will fix it, or maybe the scientists will show it wasn't so bad. But then we see headline after headline from Australia, from Madagascar, where they are confronting the worst drought in decades that we know was exacerbated by climate change. from British Columbia and Oregon and Washington State, where they experienced a killer heat wave this summer that was 150 times more likely because of a changing climate. From Afghanistan, where climate change is truly a threat multiplier. Climate change did not cause the situation in Afghanistan, but it is making it worse. Parts of Afghanistan have warmed twice as much as the global average. Spring rains have declined in some of the country's most important farmland. Droughts are more frequent. And so what's happening? The effects of warming are acting as what the military calls a threat multiplier, amplifying conflict over water, putting people out of work, and exacerbating the impact of climate change. So one hydrologist, a professor at Kabul University, says the war has actually exacerbated climate impacts because for 10 years, over 50% of the national budget goes to the war. Our current situation today is completely hopeless, and climate change is making it worse. Then we have massive hurricanes that are supersized by the impacts of a warmer ocean, causing them to intensify faster and drop a lot more rain. And then what did we just see this week? Literally this week, California records the driest year in a century. Look at the date, October 18. Now look at the next date, October 25. California rain breaks records as atmospheric river pounds the state. And you know what? Both atmospheric rivers and record-breaking droughts in California have both been tied to the impacts of a warmer world. The science does not give us a lot of hope, and neither does the politics. So just before the pandemic hit, back in February 2020, which feels like what, about 18 to 20 years ago now? Just before the pandemic hit, the Pew Foundation polled Americans and asked where you ranked certain priorities. And at the very top of the most politically polarized issue was climate change. Here, the width of the gray bar indicates how polarized an issue is. The wider the gray bar, the more polarized it is. Right here at the top, we have climate change and environmental protection. And it has been up there since the Obama administration. Fast forward until this year, 2021, what do we have up at the top? We have issues around race. We have dealing with the COVID outbreak. And what else do we have? Climate change. It is right up there at the top. And in fact, the only reason it's not at the top is because Democrats who see it as a priority have dropped. So Republicans haven't changed. Democrats have dropped. Horrifying. No hope there. Then, when we look to the international scene, I'm getting ready to head to Glasgow for the beginning of November for the 26th Conference of Parties, that's what COP stands for, the 26th Conference of Parties to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. It was signed in 1992, 30 years ago. And in it, every country in the world agreed to stabilize greenhouse gas levels it says greenhouse gas twice, to stabilize greenhouse gas concentrations at a level that would prevent dangerous human interference with the climate system. And then we spent almost 25 years arguing at what that level was. Today, here's where we stand. We need to keep warming below 2 degrees Celsius if we can, in the yellow zone, and even better, at or below 1.5 degrees, the green zone, if we could. That's what we need to do. Our pledges and targets will only keep warming to 2.4 degrees, and our current actual policies, which is quite different, right? You can promise something, but if you haven't enacted it, our current policies will only keep warming to 2.9 degrees. And when you look at where the countries are in terms of the colors on this thermometer from green to gray, when you look at where the countries are, it's not that encouraging. When Morocco and the Gambia are leading the world, when Bhutan, Costa Rica, Ethiopia, India, Kenya, and the Philippines are setting an example, and when you've got the United States, the Russian Federation, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, Ukraine, and Vietnam dragging their feet, This does not inspire hope. Now, of course, if the infrastructure and the Build Back Better bills pass, the United States will move significantly up. So it is a great idea now to call your local representative and your local senator and say, we need these legislations passed, because it will help the US measure up to its target and its promises. And it gets worse. Now, I know you're thinking, I thought this was going to be about hope, but I'm just laying out everything that doesn't give us hope first. Trust me, we're about to turn the corner, but before we do, I have to tell you what, frankly, is the most frustrating to me, the most depressing to me, what makes me the angriest, what makes me the saddest, is the fact that the most marginalized people in the world, the 3.5 billion poorest people in the world, are responsible for 7% of the problem. 7%. And that is not fair. Who are the people who are most affected by climate change? They are the people who are already marginalized, who are already living below the poverty line right here in the United States, as well as on the other side of the world. And they also tend to include more women and children than men, Indigenous peoples who have already lost so much, communities that are already suffering from racism, marginalization, and injustice. Those are the communities that are disproportionately affected by the impacts of a changing climate. So, given all of this, where do we find hope? You can see that a climate scientist is probably the best person to ask, right? Because I know, and I've just shared with you a little bit more, how incredibly depressing, frustrating, saddening all of this is. I know more than anyone else. I study this all the time. So if I can find hope, you can too. And where do we find it? Well, what does give me hope? It's not the idea that if we just wish everything to be okay, it will be. If we imitate the mythical ostrich, so to speak, ostriches, of course, don't really do this, then everything will be okay. I am not talking about the power of positive thinking. I'm not talking about just hoping and praying and wishing it to be well, and then just saying, well, let the chips fall where they may. That is not what I'm talking about. I am talking about real hope, rational hope, that first of all recognizes the risk and understands what is at stake. We are looking it right in the eyes, understanding it is bad, it will get worse, that there is a chance of success, but that chance is not inevitable or even necessarily the most probable outcome. But real hope provides what? It provides what we most lack right now. And that is a vision of a better future. That is what we most lack, and that is what our hope provides. Something to head towards rather than just to run away from. A small, bright light at the end of the tunnel that we know leads to a better future. We may be far from it, but we can fix our eyes on that, and we can do everything we can to get there. And we can grab everybody by the hand that we can and take them with us in that direction. Because only together will we get there. That's what hope offers. So when we look to the science, it turns out the science offers a little bit of hope. Because what the science shows us, and this is a figure from the very latest IPCC report, is that the warmer it gets, that's on the left-hand side, the warmer it gets depends on what? It depends on how much carbon we produce. And what does that mean? It means that our future is in our hands. It is up to us what happens. We are not tied to the proverbial railway track watching the train bearing down on us with nothing we can do. We are actually in the driver's seat. We are in the engine, so to speak, of that train. We are the ones, us together, all of us as humans, we are the ones controlling the train. We have agency. We have the ability to choose our future still. And in fact, this is what the IPCC concludes. And this to me is a very hopeful statement. Every action matters. Every bit of warming matters. Every year matters. And every choice matters. It matters. That's what the science says. Being a scientist, I also wanted to turn the question around. So I asked hundreds of people then this was done before the pandemic, I would say, I asked hundreds of people, what gives you hope? Because I wanted to know what people would say. And first of all, we see that having this ability to change the future absolutely gives us hope. This is a tremendous quote from one of my colleagues, Katharine, who, as you can see, spells her name the right way. And she was one of the co-editors of All We Can Save, which is an amazing compendium of women's voices on climate change. And she said this, and I love this so much, I took it to end my own book, Saving Us. She says this, which perfectly encapsulates where we stand. She says, it is a magnificent time to be alive at a moment that matters so much. We truly can make a difference. This is the moment that will be written in the history books if we have them. And it is up to us whether or not that happens. So then when I turned to people and I surveyed them, I said, what gives you hope? And as you can see, I just left it totally open. People could answer whatever they wanted to, and then I categorized all their answers. And it was really interesting that in addition to other people, and you saw things like movements, organizations, people, faith, spirituality, attitudes, up at the very top were children and young people. So I dug into this a little bit and I said, well, is it because we think young people will save us? And of course, there's plenty of reason to think that they would. If we could just hurry things along and put them in charge of the world. I mean, you have 11-year-olds attending scientific conferences with renewable energy technologies that she's developed. You have 17-year-olds building an algae biofuel lab under their bed and winning national science fairs. You have thousands of schools using solar panel. You have children suing federal governments in Germany and Canada and the United States. You have the children's climate strikes. You have children collecting cooking oil and running their school bus off it. You have amazing children doing amazing things. But when I asked people, is it because you expect children to fix it? Is that where your hope is? Everybody said no. That is not what we mean. What we mean is that is why we're fighting. We are fighting because of our kids. That's my son there. I love this sign. Fight climate change or your grandkids will curse and disown you. We are fighting because of them. We are fighting for some of the most powerful love that we have. It's love that motivates us for our own children, for other children, for the future. And in fact, there's a really interesting quote that's made me think of from a novel by P.D. James. It was also made into a movie, which you might have seen, where a global flu pandemic sweeps the world. Sound familiar? And as a result, people can't have children anymore. And that world descends into the most hopeless situation you have ever seen because there is literally no future. There are no children. Humans, as we know it, are done. No humans, no civilization, nothing. And so here's what one of the characters said. They said, it was reasonable to suffer, perhaps even to die for a more just, more compassionate society, but not in a world with no future, where all too soon the very words justice and compassion would be unheard echoes on the empty air. Children are a symbol. They are a symbol to us. The next generation is a symbol of that bright light at the end of the tunnel. They are a symbol that there is a future. They are a reminder that there must be a future. And so that's why so many choose them as their image of a source of hope, is because they actually represent what we are all fighting for. But what else gives us hope? When I turned to the social science, there was one more key thing. And that was this: we are worried. Today, 70% of us are worried, 70%. But 50% of us feel hopeless and helpless. We don't know where to start. Why do we feel hopeless? We don't know what to do. And this is why the concept of efficacy is so important. What is efficacy? It's the simple idea that if I do something, will it make a difference? If I scrub the sidewalk, will it stay clean? In my case, I have zero sense of efficacy on that. It won't. So I don't do it. We have the same feeling with climate change. If I do anything, will it make a difference? No, I say. So we don't do it. We view climate change as a giant boulder sitting at the bottom of an impossibly steep cliff with only a few hands trying to get it moving. It is not moving at all. And if we add our hand to it, nothing will happen. That is how we view climate change. What's the reality? The reality is that giant boulder is already at the top of the hill. It is already rolling down the hill in the right direction. It already has not just one set of hands on it, it already has millions of hands on it. And if you add yours, and if I add mine, and if we add ours together as a congregation, as a city, as a school, as a place of work, as a sports team, whoever we are, if we add our hands to that boulder, it will go faster because it is already moving. It is already going down the hill. Climate action is already happening, and there are millions of people around the world making it happen. And when we add our hands and our voice, it will move faster. And that simple concept is what gives us efficacy. And efficacy is the number one thing that we lack. As Greta Thunberg says, she puts it a slightly different way, but it's exactly the same point. The one thing we need more than hope is action. And once we start to act, hope is everywhere. So at this point, you might be asking, where do I start? You might already be doing more, in which case you might be saying, how do I get both hands and both feet on that boulder? Where we can start is a bit counterintuitive. I'm not going to mention anything to do with plug-in cars or solar panels or LEDs or plant-based diets. All of those are good things to do that reduce our personal footprint. But the most important place we can start is by doing the one thing that most of us are not doing. Most of us are not talking about it. Only 14% of us talk about climate change on a regular basis. Why don't we talk about it? Because we don't think it matters to us. We don't know how to communicate it to others or why it matters to them. And we don't think there's anything positive we can do to fix it. So climate changes and we get worried. We're all worried. 70% of all Americans are worried, and all of us are worried too, right? So what do we typically do? Typically, we load up on scary facts and we dump them on people who we think are not worried enough yet. What happens? Well, it turns out this is where our human psychology kicks in. When we are already worried and somebody dumps more scary facts on us and we feel no sense of efficacy, we reject it even more. Inaction results. Tali Sherrod is a neuroscientist, and she wrote a really fascinating book called The Influential Mind, nothing to do with climate change and everything to do with climate change. Here's what she says about fear-based messaging. Fear and anxiety cause us to withdraw, to freeze, to give up rather than take action, and climate changes more. I added that last part. So the second most common question I get, and the one that I'm going to end with tonight before we go into our own Q&A, is this. And don't forget, you can be putting in your questions at any time as long as we go along and upvoting them too. How do I talk to somebody about this? How do I talk to my uncle, my in-law? We're not quite there yet, Joelle, sorry, another 5 minutes. How do I talk to my uncle, my in-laws, my colleagues, my neighbors? How do I talk to people about this? How do I have a conversation if dumping more doom-filled facts on them doesn't work? We think, surely if they just knew, they would change their minds. Well, it turns out that that isn't why we have a problem. But it turns out that we can have a good conversation with almost everyone except for the 8%ers. Who are the 8%ers? They are the dismissives who are absolutely obsessed with the idea that climate change is a hoax. They are the loudest voices on social media. They're the loudest voices in the comment section of any newspaper. They bring it up all the time and they can't leave it alone like a sore tooth. My personal definition of a dismissive is if an angel from God with brand new tablets of stone appeared to them that say global warming is real in foot-high letters of flame, they still wouldn't believe. So why would I think I could make a difference? I can't. But with everybody else, the 92%, we absolutely can. How? not by tilting at windmills, not by tackling the sciencey sounding myths people raise, or even the religiously sounding myths. Those are just smoke screens. The real problems we have are this: psychological distance and solution aversion. We don't think it matters, and we don't think we can fix it. Those are our two biggest problems. Now, this may be the first time you've heard these, so let me just unpack this for just a second. What is psychological distance? It's the idea that it doesn't matter. So how do we address it? By talking about how it matters. What's solution aversion? I don't think we can fix it. How do we address it? By talking about all the things we can do to fix it. Let me give you some examples. Psychological distance sees an issue as being distant in time or space, abstract rather than concrete, and irrelevant to our primary concerns. This is what happens to climate change. When you ask people across the US, is it happening? People say, yes, it's happening, yes. Anywhere that's orange is greater than 50%, and the darker orange, the more people say yes. Then you say, is it going to affect plants and animals? Yes. Distant in relevance, non-human species. Will it affect future generations distant in time? Yes. Will it affect people in developing countries? Yes. Will it affect people in the United States? Probably. We're getting a little closer to home, and then they ask, will it affect you? Nobody thinks it will affect them. So how do we turn this around? When we talk about climate change, we need to make sure that we talk about it in a way that directly tackles the problem of psychological distance. People think it's just a global problem, it doesn't matter to me. And we can say, no, climate change is now. It is here where I live. It is concrete, my basement flooding, my house being evacuated, my children breathing in smoke-filled air. And it is relevant to me. This is how we tackle the first problem. But what about that second problem? We don't think we have solutions needed to fix it. We do. How do we tell people that we do? By telling them about the solutions. There's countries that are part of the solution. Phasing out coal, divesting from fossil fuels, meeting their Paris goals. There's corporations that are taking action. Corporations that people recognize like Apple and Microsoft and Walmart and Google. There's churches that are taking action. Catholic churches, Protestant churches, evangelical churches, Orthodox churches, Jewish congregations, Buddhist congregations or organizations. There are all kinds of faith-based hope. Share those stories. Look out, seek out who's doing what, and talk about it. I love talking about what's happening in Texas. We have more wind energy than any other state. We have army bases going renewable. We have even changes happening in the Texas of Canada and Alberta. Talk about what's happening where you live. There's something happening everywhere. I promise you there is. Talk about the young people for sure. Why not? They give us hope because they show us what we should be doing too, right? Talk about how our own lives are changing. This is where our individual choices come in. Yes, change your light bulbs, change your diet, change your car, change how you eat, change your solar panels. But you know what? Talk about it. Talk about it, because that's how we change the world, is by talking about what we're doing. If we only change ourselves, we're changing our footprint. If we're talking about it, we're changing our shadow. Our shadow reaches through time and space, far beyond our individual footprint. And how do we spread our shadow far and wide? By talking and acting and using our voices to advocate for change. I love talking about how the world is changing. Did you know that 90% of new energy installed around the world last year was clean energy? 90%. That's something we can talk about, right? So where do we start again? We start by doing the one thing we're not, which is using our voice to talk about why it matters and what we can do to fix it. We aren't doing that. This is the map. It's even darker blue than the one before, showing that we don't talk about it even occasionally. But we can turn this around. Take an inventory, and actually do this in my book. Take an inventory of who you are. This is my inventory. Find points of connection with other people who might share something that you do. You might be a gardener. You might fish. You might be a parent at your child's school. You might be a person of faith or not a person of faith. Do an inventory of who you are and begin your conversations with other people who share your interests, your values, your priorities. Bond over shared values, connect to how climate change is affecting it, and inspire by talking about real solutions and how we can work together to tackle this problem. So when we go through that cycle of climate changes and we get worried, here's what you do. Here's where we break the cycle right here. Instead of dumping loads of scary facts on people, what do we tell them? We tell people why it matters to us here and now in ways that are concrete and relevant. And we share positive, constructive solutions so people feel empowered and action results. And here's what neuroscience says. It says, our human brain is built to associate forward action with a reward, not avoiding harm. So reframe, and I promise you she is not talking about climate change here, but I also promise you she is. Reframe your message so the information you provide induces hope, not dread. Hope, not dread. This can happen at large scales. We did an amazing study where we made short videos and aired them on social media, and it changed Republican minds in the real world on social media. Why? Because we started with free market, Christian faith, national security, personal liberties. We started with something that they cared about, connected the dots to climate, offered positive, constructive solutions in 1 minute, and it changed people's minds. Change did not begin with the King of England deciding to end slavery, or the President of the United States giving women the vote, or the National Party of South Africa opting to end apartheid. It began when ordinary people of no particular power, wealth, or fame decided the world could and should be different. Who were these people? Some of their names we know, but most we don't. They were people who had the courage of their convictions, who used their voices to advocate for the societal changes we needed. We ordinary people, we're the people who changed the world before, and we are the people who can and must change it again. So before I go to answering your questions, I have one more question for you, and it's the same question I asked you before. Now, right now, when it comes to climate change, what do you feel? Go to pollev.com/Katharine and give me a word. What do you feel? And I love that. Determined, yes. Motivated, yes. You have efficacy. You can make a difference. Every single one of us can put our hand on that boulder. And the biggest thing we can do is by using our voice to advocate for change wherever we are. Imagine your climate shadow. How far can it stretch? Across your city? Across your church? Across the internet? Across your mom's group? Across your sports team? Across the world? How far can your shadow stretch? When we combine our shadows, that is what changes the world. And I love the fact that, yes, we can still be scared. We can still be worried. We can still feel just slightly better. That is okay. It is a long road we're on, and one talk isn't going to change things. But that's why I wrote the book. And that's why I explain in the book how to find hope, how to share hope, how to nurture hope, and ultimately how we can all head towards that better future together. Thank you.
Thank you, Katharine, very much for that great presentation. We're going to spend the remainder of our time talking with Dr. Hayhoe and having her respond to questions, as she's already explained. We want to begin that process with two individuals who are particularly concerned about climate issues. First is Joelle Novi, who, as Director of Interfaith Power and Light in the DC, Virginia, Maryland area, is a full-time activist on climate change. We'll talk a little about IPL later and how you can get involved with their work. Second is Linda Kelly, who's a member of the New York Avenue Presbyterian Church and a junior in high school at Stone Ridge School of the Sacred Heart. And Linda is sort of representative of the millions of young people who are concerned about this issue and what it means for their future. So welcome, Joelle and Linda, to start the questioning. And I think Joelle's going to begin, and she and Linda will take some turns, and then we'll invite all of some of the questions you submitted earlier and pose those to Dr. Hayhoe.
Thank you so much. And thank you so much, Katharine. I have been opening conversations about climate change as my full-time job for about 12 years now. And you've been one of my most important teachers in how to do that work for that whole time. So so many thanks for tonight and for your work over this time. So as the first question, I was really struck by a sentence in your book when you were talking about your values and what brings you to this work. You said a failure to care about climate change is a failure to love. And I thought, wow, that is, first of all, that's a completely universal way of talking about it. Everyone loves something, and everyone has something that they love that is endangered by climate change. So it's a failure of all of us to love. And then I thought about how many of our current, it focuses us in the right place. It focuses us on caretaking and our values, right? It doesn't focus us on scientific questions. And then I thought about how many of our social problems, not just climate change, right? Like what is a pandemic that we can't, protect each other from sufficiently, but a failure to love? And what is gun violence but a failure to love? And like, what's racial violence but a failure to love? So many of our struggles are ultimately a failure to love. And I also love this phrase because it points us at the solution, which is that we need to be loving better. And that it just so happened that like many of the 370 people on the line tonight are thinking the same way, because one of the top voted questions is about expanding our circle of compassion larger in the way we need to include the future, to include people around the world, such that we can meet this moment. So this is maybe not a fair question to ask a scientist. It's really a spiritual question, but I'm just curious as a person, as a human being, what your thoughts are about how we all might grow in our capacity to love and to love better than we do now.
Well, I love that you honed in on that, because that is exactly the case. And to be totally honest, the book is not exactly about climate change. It's more like the icing is climate change and the cake is about how do we get along and head towards a better future for us all. And climate change is one of the biggest things standing in the way to that better future. But if we can come together on the most contentious issue in the United States in the last 10 years, what else might we be able to come together along the way? And what else might we be able to fix? So love is really at the core of it. And here's, I think, where we've fallen short. And I'm so glad you brought in that question, which is fantastic. We often assume, and this is something I say in the book, that people will have to care about this for the same self-evident reasons that we care about it. I care about it because of this. And so obviously everybody should care about it because of this. And if they don't care about it because of this, they're probably a bad person. They don't have the morals or the ethics that they need, and they need to have the right priorities. Well, most people have ethics and morals and are living according to them. People have values and want to live true to them, but they're different than ours. Almost everybody has something they love. Almost everyone does. And I say almost, I mean just about every single person in the world, right? We have something we love. And if we don't think we care about climate change, it's simply because we have not connected the dots between what we love and how climate change affects it. I alluded at the beginning to the problem that so often it's called saving the planet. But if we talked about it as saving our child or saving something we're passionate about, like, as I talk about in the book, there's a young ski racer who's just a little bit older than Linda, who's passionate about her sport. And so that's what she wants to save. There's people who are passionate about food. There's people who are very passionate about justice. There's people who are passionate, whatever it is we're passionate about. Climate change is affecting it, I guarantee you. We have passed the point where you could sort of pick and choose. Whatever somebody is passionate about and cares about, climate change is affecting it. So it isn't a case of teaching people to be more compassionate about what we care about ourselves. It's about us being more compassionate and figuring out what they care about, and then helping them connect the dots between what they care about and how climate change is affecting it and what solutions they can engage in. And that absolutely requires compassion. We have to walk a mile in somebody else's shoes rather than forcing them into our shoes. But that is exactly how we get everybody on board with this.
Somebody in the chat is saying, save the chocolate, because that's the thing they love.
Yes. And as I talk about in the book, you can save the beer, you can save the wine, you can save the tennis, the running, the beaches. Yes, it doesn't matter because we all have something we love, and every single one of those things is at risk from climate change, other than cockroaches. If that's the one thing you're passionate about, I'm sorry, but you might not have the reason you need to care about climate change.
Thank you. Linda, do you want to take a turn?
Absolutely. You, during this talk, you mentioned a lot that the biggest thing that gives people hope, or at least people who aren't my generation hope, is young people, is the children, really. And that's, I mean, I guess, like, that's nice. Optimism from adults like that, like, oh, I have faith in your generation, is always kind of like, that's wonderful. But what is to give us hope? If we're giving other people hope, what's to give us hope?
Well, I'm glad you asked that because first of all, I want to emphasize this. So I thought what you thought when I first saw those answers. I thought, oh, they're saying what a wonderful generation. They're so caring. They're so motivated. They're going to fix it. That's what I thought. But that's why I sat down. I started to ask people, what did you mean by that? And when I asked them, what did you mean? Everybody I talked to said, no, that's not what I mean. I mean that we need to fix it for them. That's why we're fighting, is for, and not even, sometimes it might be for a specific child, but more often it was more the idea that children are a symbol of the future. And so, if nobody was having children anymore and there would be no human race, in 10, 20, 30 years, eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we die. But just knowing that we continue and our shadow continues in the next generation, so to speak, and not even necessarily in our own children per se, but just we, all of us, influence each other, and that influence continues over time. And I was thinking, how many people am I influenced by who are no longer alive? Probably hundreds. I mean, as a scientist, I learned from scientists who have passed away. As a child, I learned from my parents, grandparents, great-grandparents. As a person who reads, I learned from people who have written things who are no longer alive. Our shadow continues. And that, I think, is sort of what gives us hope, is the idea that we're interconnected through the generations. But what can give you hope is what I alluded to at the very end: efficacy. Every single one of us can make a difference. When we add our hand to that boulder, it goes a little bit faster. And how do we add our hand? By using our voice. And what are young people doing? You are using your voices more effectively than anyone else on the planet right now. So you are already making a difference. And as Greta says, when we act, hope is all around us. So I really feel like your generation is setting an example for us of how every single one of us, no matter who we are, no matter how old we are, we can all find hope through action. Our own action and that of others.
So speaking of the call to action, the world is preparing for another UN climate meeting you mentioned. And I loved your analogy in the book of these types of meetings as a potluck meals, to which the United States has not been bringing our fair share, and the major polluters have not. I figured those of us in congregations and churches in particular, like, understand the hazards of potluck freeloaders. It's a serious issue. So one possible way, as you mentioned, that the US might still bring a legit dish to this global potluck would be to pass meaningful climate policy as part of the Build Back Better Act that's before Congress right now. And you speak about a few mechanisms in the book that could be part of other policies like carbon pricing or cap and trade. But I wanted, if you would be able to speak briefly about some of the key climate provisions in the bill that's currently on the table, the Clean Energy Payment Plan, some of the methane provisions that you see as the most important to try to keep in the bill.
Mm-hmm. So the Clean Energy Plan addresses the low-hanging fruit. The electricity sector is the low-hanging fruit. That's where we have most of the solutions we need to decarbonize very quickly is in electricity. And just for a perspective, the reason why climate change is so challenging is because it isn't just one sector. We have industry, we have transportation, we have electrical power, and we have heating and cooling our homes. Those are sort of the major sectors for carbon emissions. And then we also have land use, deforestation, and agriculture. All told, 75% of the problem is fossil fuels, burning fossil fuels, and 25% of the problem is agriculture and land use and deforestation. So the electricity sector is the low-hanging fruit because wind and solar energy is already cheaper than natural gas and far cheaper than coal in most of the country. And that includes storage. So a University of California, Berkeley study estimated that if we electrified most of our vehicles, which would increase the load on the power grid, and we decarbonized 80% of the grid, we could easily do so with existing technology by 2030, which is just 8 years away, and we would save $1.7 trillion in avoided costs due to the damages of fossil fuels, and it would spur $1.5 trillion of investment in the economy. That's the low-hanging fruit, and that's what the CEPP is aimed at kickstarting, and that's why it's so essential to have it in this bill. What happens if it doesn't go in? Well, the interesting thing is that it didn't have carbon pricing in the bill. But now, if CEPP is not going to pass, thanks to a certain person who we all know, maybe carbon pricing could make it in. It wouldn't be sectoral wide, it wouldn't be across the whole economy, but it would be focused on the power sector. And carbon pricing is an extremely effective mechanism for spurring innovation in a free market, where people, if you still want to drive your gas guzzler, you drive it, but you pay for it. If you still want to power your factory with coal, you can, but you pay for it. So nobody's trying to tell you what you can or can't do. They're just going to say, look, it's only fair that you pay the cost. If you're going to dump your garbage in your neighbor's yard, you have to pay for the cleanup. That's what carbon pricing is. So there is a chance that that could get in instead, which would not be a bad thing at all. So do not give up hope. Not as all is not lost, but now is definitely the time to call. Call everybody you know and tell them this has to happen. This is the climate legislation of the decade. The United States needs it now. We have to take something to Paris, to Glasgow. Right now, we're taking a fresh baked apple pie that looks steaming and delicious, and then you cut into it and there is hot air. We need a content to that pie, and that is going to happen right now. So that's what the bill is about. But it also has lots of things about infrastructure, about capping methane leaks, which methane is a very powerful heat trapping gas. We leak enough methane in West Texas to power 7,000 households in Texas. It is horrifying what we're doing. It's just going right into the atmosphere. Nobody's doing anything about it. There is a big financial cost associated with that methane, and the people who are producing it either need to pay the price or stop. They can pick. So there's a lot of very sensible things in this bill, and I am, hoping and praying and doing everything I can to make sure that people know that this is important and it needs to pass.
Thank you. I just dropped a link in the chat for anyone who wants to take action through Interfaith Power and Light about that. Linda, I thought maybe we'll take one more question from you and then go to the group.
Yeah. This, my question is kind of in the same vein. How can we hold corporations accountable?
So it begins with using our voice, and our voice can be expressed in many different ways. Our voice can be expressed in terms of where our retirement funds are invested, right? Our voice can be expressed in terms of whether we serve on or appear or show up for shareholder meetings. And in fact, the most interesting thing is, you've probably heard of Engine Number One. Engine Number One organized enough Exxon shares that they could actually push ExxonMobil for a climate resolution. How did they do that? By engaging at their own game, using their voice and their money and their influence and their shadow with one of the biggest carbon producers in the world. There are people who work at companies. Companies are made up of people, right? There are people who work at companies who are using their voice. Why do you think Amazon has a climate justice plan? I'm willing to bet it was not because Jeff Bezos just spontaneously woke up one morning and decided to have one. It was because people at Amazon, some of whose names we know, but a lot of them we don't, use their voices in Amazon to say, we need a climate plan. And then, because Amazon is a very entrepreneurial company, they started looking at how could we make this happen? Ooh, EVs for everybody. So as Amazon switches to EVs, that's going to lower the price for everybody because they're going to be manufactured at greater and greater volume. How did it all happen? Somebody in there had a bright idea one day and they used their voice to talk about it. So there are so many ways to influence corporations, from the inside, from the outside, from halfway in between, and of course, using our voice. People with signs outside their offices, that's a way to do it too. There are so many ways to do it. There's not just one way. There's every way, and people inside the company are doing it. People inside the sectors are doing it. People at nonprofits, like I work at the Nature Conservancy now, they are big about working with companies if they can guarantee they're good faith actors to help those companies feel a sense of efficacy, because often companies don't even feel efficacy. They don't know what they can do. They need someone to give them suggestions of what they could actually accomplish. So there are so many ways to do it. And all of us, I think, can be part of it, because we're all consumers. We're all customers. We have things that we do with our money, and we can reach out and use our voices. We can reach out with our money. We can do it in so many different ways, using our voice, adding that hand to the boulder to get it go faster.
I'm going to start raising up some of the questions that are getting a lot of energy in the system here.
And lots of good comments too in the chat. Lots of great comments.
Yes, I'm also trying to keep track of the chat.
Yes.
So you tell a lot of stories about successful attempts to bridge divides with folks in conversation. And you give some good advice about dealing with those dismissive folks. And I know you deal with more vitriol online and that we can imagine in terms of people's the way they communicate with you about this issue. So somebody asked, and then a lot of people were interested in hearing an answer about, how do I calmly respond to a brother or sister in Christ who shouts, yells, and screams that climate change is a fraud, a hoax, and that I am a traitor? And there's no one better to help us.
I am going to read how my book begins. And Joelle, so that's why you're laughing. Here is how my book begins. I'm getting used to being hated. It's not for anything I've done. It's because of what I represent. Communist, libtard, lunatic. Jezebel, liar, whore. High priestess of the climate cult and handmaiden of the Antichrist. I've been called it all. So I hear you. I hear you, and you actually now see my very fancy picture prop. There we go. That was not a planned reading, but it's the perfect answer to that question. I hear you, and I have been there. So you're speaking of the 7 or 8% who are dismissive, and I hear from them every single day on social media, every day. If somebody is yelling at us, if somebody is calling us names, there is no respect. There is no ability to listen. They will not be able to hear any words that are coming out of your mouth. They literally won't be able to hear them. So if they're literally yelling at you, I would just suggest, if you can, take a deep breath and say, I'm sorry, that's not true, and walk away. Walk away. If they're not yelling, but they are saying those types of things, let me share with you a conversation I had with a man at church. He came up to me. He had finally realized I was a climate scientist, and he came up to me and he's very perturbed, and he says, climate change is not true. It's a hoax. And I said, no, it's not. And this was in Texas. I said, no, it's not. And did you know that we get 23% of our energy from wind and solar energy in Texas? He looked at me like this. He said, well, all those scientists are just making it up. I said, no, they're not. And did you know that we have the largest army base in the United States, in Texas, and it is powered by clean energy and saving taxpayers $150 million? He looked a little puzzled there, and they said, well, it's just a volcanic eruption that's causing it. I said, no, it's not. And did you know that per megawatt hour, solar energy creates 1.5 times more jobs than natural gas? At that point, he stopped and he said, why are you saying these things to me? I said, because those are the solutions to climate change. Do you have a problem with Texas leading the US in clean energy, with the Army saving taxpayer money, and with creating new local jobs? He said, no. And so I said, well, then we agree. We agree on the solutions, and it doesn't matter if we agree on the science because the solutions are what matter. I'm glad you're on board with me. Obama faked his birth certificate, he said. I said, all right. At that point, I say, no, he didn't, and I walk away. That is a literal conversation that happened. But with dismissives, we can't persuade them. We literally can't. The best thing we can do is if there's anybody else listening, respond clearly and factually, which I describe how to do in my book. In fact, the first part of the book talks about how to have these conversations, but focus on the 92% who are not dismissive. That is where people are worried. People are concerned, but they feel hopeless and helpless, and they are not activated. Even people who are alarmed are not activated. Their hands are not on the boulder. The problem is not the 8%. The problem is the 92% whose hands are not on the boulder. Maybe 91%. 1% of hands on the boulder, 91% not. That's where we can have the positive, constructive conversations. With the silent majority where we think, oh, they think the same as us, there's no point talking to them. No, those are the very people we need to be talking to about why it matters and about what we can do as a neighborhood, as a school, as a place of work, as a place of worship, as a team, as an organization, as a Lions Club, Kiwanis Club, Rotary Club, as whatever it is we're part of, what we can do together to make a difference. That's what we need to be talking about.
I was really struck by, I'm going to maybe get the exact words wrong, but you talked about the moral value of electricity, which is different from saying that that we need to keep burning fossil fuels. And this is related to one of the questions that I'm seeing in the chat about electricity. But can you talk more about that distinction? Because I think a lot of people think that these climate activists want us to sit in the dark and do without electricity, when in fact we need to electrify everything, and just making that shift for folks rhetorically in terms of the value of electricity.
So a common argument in faith-based circles is, what about low-income countries? Don't they deserve the fossil fuels that we use to develop? They absolutely deserve to develop. But if we're saying that they have to do so using fossil fuels, we are saying you can only use what we used 200 years ago. So in other words, you don't get cell phones yet. You only get the party line telephone. You don't get, plug-in cars. You just get like Model T Fords. Talk about patronizing and colonialistic. That's it. The reason low-income countries are not more developed is primarily because they don't have fossil fuels. With only a few exceptions, Venezuela, Nigeria, and Brazil, with only a few exceptions, most of those countries do not have vast fossil fuel resources. And in the countries that do, they're being extracted by multinational corporations that are taking those resources outside the country, enriching a very few people at the top of the oligarchy, and leaving everybody else just as poor as they were before, except with the environmental devastation left behind, like in the Niger Delta. But energy is a moral necessity. Fossil fuels are no longer. 90% of new energy installed around the world last year was clean energy. 90%. Much of it in low-income countries where they don't have a lot of coal or natural gas or oil, but they have a lot of sun and a lot of wind. China has been building fossil fuel or coal-fired power plants in low-income countries. Why? Because they don't want to burn their own coal because of air pollution. They've been trying to get other countries indebted to them, so they have to buy it. Now, they're promised that they're going to stop doing that, which is great news. Why? Because people use their voices to talk about why it matters and what we could do that does not involve making low-income countries dependent on the fossil fuels from richer countries. So there absolutely are solutions, and electricity is most strongly correlated with human well-being of almost anything in our modern age. But that electricity does not have to come from fossil fuels anymore. And even though, as someone said, let me focus on this too, because this is a common misconception. People often assume that there is a free lunch when it comes to energy. There is no free lunch. There is no source of energy that does not have any cost associated with it at all. But there is an extremely expensive lunch, so to speak, from fossil fuels that is responsible for almost 9 million premature deaths a year from air pollution. And there is a much more affordable lunch from clean energy that does require the mining of lithium and cobalt for batteries and storage, for example, in EVs. And of course, at the local scale, mining of rare earth minerals is an important environmental issue and is potentially an important human rights issue, depending on where those resources come from. There is no free lunch when it comes to energy, but there is a lunch that costs 9 million lives per year. And there is a lunch that costs a lot less with no air pollution, small amount of regional pollution that needs to be dealt with. We also need to figure out how to recycle wind turbines, solar panels, and batteries. I was talking to the National Renewable Energy Lab recently, and they're working on that. There are plans in the works to do that. They need to move a bit faster, but they're planning to do that. But this whole myth of perfection, like somehow there's a way to get energy that doesn't cost anything, it is false. There's very expensive. And if we keep on going this way, it'll be so expensive it will cost us our entire economy and our civilization as we know it, plus many human lives. And there's a much more affordable way that is not perfect, but it is a lot better than what we have today. I want to be very clear on that.
So I'm going to offer one last question from the poll. It's going to be the one that got the most votes that we haven't asked yet. But I'm going to use my prerogative to give a little caveat. So it's talking about what we do, should we feel disappointed with what Congress does with the Build Back Better Act. I just want to make sure everyone knows that there are 5 young people on hunger strike in front of the White House right now on their 7th day, expressing their anguish directly to the president and the Senate about keeping those climate provisions in the bill. And as long as they haven't given up, I haven't given up. So I'm standing with them. But this question sort of is thinking ahead to after that fight. If we feel that Congress is unable to act sufficiently in this moment, where would you suggest we turn to affect our political systems? What's the next step for the climate movement in this country?
So a statistic that not a lot of people know in the United States is that 99.9% of elected officials are not federal. Cities, states, counties, school boards. You know who controls all that leaking methane out in West Texas that I was talking about that could power 7,000 households? The Railway Commissioner. Yet somehow that is not on most people's radars when they're going to vote. Local politics, well, what they say is all politics is local, right? Local changes can have a huge impact. Cities are such change makers. They can affect change locally. They can reduce the urban heat island effect, mitigate flooding, cut carbon emissions, build public transportation, enact efficiency standards, retrofit buildings. Cities are so powerful. States can do a lot. Counties can do a lot too. So don't think for a second that there's the federal government or nothing. There is so much that can be done at a level other than the federal government that we need to be engaged in and voting on pretty much everything, including elections at our school or university, elections in the church, elections in the General Assembly. There are so many changes that can be made at every level. And I just want to give you one super hopeful one that's a very personal one. 2 weeks ago, there was a General Assembly of the Presbyterian Church of Ireland. And that's where the church brings issues to the vote. How do issues get on the docket? By people using their voices to talk about why it matters and to get enough people together to have a critical mass to actually have a vote on an issue. So the Presbyterian Church in Ireland had been having a conversation about climate change for some time, and they put on the docket in their General Assembly 2 weeks ago to vote on a motion to divest from fossil fuels and to engage with people who work in the fossil fuel industry to encourage and support a just transition and support for workers in that industry at the same time. Talk about the two sides of the coin. Talk about showing love right there. And when they brought it to the General Assembly, here's the amazing thing. They quoted from my book. And they quoted from talks I've given before to churches where I talk about how climate change affects the poorest and most vulnerable among us. And as any people of faith, any religious tradition, that is a core part of our belief system. So you know what? Your voice can make a difference. It can make a huge difference. You might not know until later. You might never know. Or you might find out what a difference it's made. But you can make a difference. Every single one of us can. And how do we add our hand to that boulder to get it going faster downhill? We do it by using our voice to talk about why it matters in ways that are relevant to the person we're talking to, and talking about positive, practical solutions that can be solutions other people are doing. They could be solutions we're doing personally, or they could be solutions that we could do together. That's how we change the world.
Thank you so much, Joelle and Linda and Dr. Hayhoe, for your great answers and comments. As we get near the end of our time, we want to call your attention to some ways to get involved with this issue. We've got a couple of brief announcements, and then we're going to invite Dr. Hayhoe to make some just closing comments, what she'd like to leave with us as we close here in just a couple of minutes. We mentioned a bit about Joelle Novi's work with Interfaith Power and Light, and as you see here, a description of their work. They're active in states around the country. I think it's about 3/4 of the states have some sort of chapter. If you're tuning in from outside of Washington, DC area, you can go to interfaithpowerandlight.org and look and see where there are chapters and there are places you can get involved. If you're in the DC, Maryland, or Virginia area, it's a very active group led by Joelle and others. And you see their website there, ipldmv.org. Particularly if you're interested in taking action on the legislation that has been discussed, I think on the national website, they have information about how you can plug in to that. Of course, there are many groups and organizations working on this issue, coming at it from different ways, and you need to find your own space to be involved. But all of us can do more than we've been doing, can put more hands on that boulder, if you will. I also have a couple of brief announcements about our programs. First is that there will be a follow-up discussion to this program on Sunday morning through the Christian Education Hour at New York Avenue Presbyterian. And we invite people, of course, members of the church, but others also to join this discussion about what we can do, how we can respond, what can we do more in the various spheres of influence we have. So if you're interested in this, go to nyapc.org, and under upcoming events, there'll be information on how to join the discussion, I think either in person or by Zoom, and that's next Sunday morning, October 31st. So before you go out and do whatever you do for Halloween, there'll be an opportunity to talk about this issue. The other announcement, real briefly, just our next McClendon Scholar Program will be Thursday evening, November 11th at 7 o'clock with the Reverend William Barber. This is the program that was postponed from August. And we had a very large number of people already signed up for this. If you registered for the August program, you're automatically registered for this program on November 11th, and we'll be sending you information about that. But mark your calendars for Reverend William Barber, one of the great champions now on behalf of justice in our country. I also want to pose for you a couple of things and invite you to share your thoughts. You've been doing it. The chat is rich, and I want to pose two questions for you to continue to comment on as we close, and to type these as they come to you as Dr. Hayhoe makes her closing comments. But what did you hear tonight from Dr. Hayhoe that was most helpful to you? And or also answer, if you wish, what suggestions do you have about efforts to combat climate change that you want people to know about? And some of you, again, have been sharing that along. There have been several people asking about this program and whether it will be available, whether it is recorded. And yes, it is being recorded. And this program will be available within 48 hours on YouTube and through the NYAPC website. If you go to our website and go to the McClendon Scholar Program, a link will be there. We also will send a link to everyone who registered, because there were many who registered who couldn't join us tonight who want to see this link. So that will be available. And if you want to watch this again and share it with others, we encourage you to do that. And again, type in what was most helpful to you and any suggestions you have about how we're involved as we go forward. So I want now to turn back and invite Dr. Hayhoe again now to make a couple of whatever she wants to say in closing to us as we end our time together this evening.
Thank you so much. And it's been wonderful to see all these comments in the chat here. I've been putting some comments too for more resources. Joelle put a link where you can use your voice to talk to your elected officials about the federal bills that are under discussion right now. Please do that. But again, what's the most important thing every single one of us can do to make a difference is using our voices to talk about it. Like what? Reduce your food waste and talk about it. Check out solar panels. And if you do, talk about it. They're contagious. Look at what your church is doing or what another church is doing and yours could do, and talk about it. Share something that you learned tonight that you're putting in the chat there. Say, hey, I went to this presentation and you wouldn't believe what I heard. People are curious. They want to know. Have a conversation. Talk about it. But always, always, always bring up practical, positive solutions that we can do, which include using our voice to vote, using our voice to act ourselves, using our voice in whatever table we sit at, whatever sphere we're in, using our voice to advocate for that better future. For who? For every single living thing on this planet. That's what we're fighting for.
Thank you so much, Dr. Hayhoe. And thank you to all of you who joined us tonight for the program, took time for this. And just keep in mind the great image that was presented as we go from here about putting our hands on the boulder and pushing it forward. That's certainly what I'll be taking with me at the end of the evening. So thank you again very much for the great presentation and for all of you participating. Good night.